Hey everyone, today I'm starting a new series that a lot of people have been requesting where I play opponents at different rating levels. Now, my opponent here is 1200, I'm over 2100, so I'm a big favourite in this game obviously, but the point of playing these games is to show the way that my opponent plays at this rating level and how I'm thinking, and what I think is going to happen is we're going to notice some differences between the two. And by watching this, hopefully, if you're at that type of rating level, you can bring your own thinking a bit closer to mine. So we're just starting the game, and so far everything's pretty normal. My opponent's playing well so far, actually. He's just developed his knights off their starting squares. He's also played a pawn forward into the centre of the board, gaining space in the centre. But okay, this move already is one that I am not so sure of. By playing his bishop out to d3, my opponent is blocking the movement of his own d-pawn. This is nothing too major yet, but I think it's going to slow down his development. I think the bishop would be much better placed on c4. So let me just keep developing normally. That's what you've got to do at the start of the game. You've got to get your pieces off their starting squares and into the action. The setup that I'm going for is quite a normal one in the Sicilian. And what we see already here is that my opponent has had to correct his mistake. He's moved his bishop twice now in the first 6 moves of the game. I mean, if he wanted to put his bishop on c4, why not just do it in one move? White gets to move first in chess, and the benefit of that is that you get a slight lead in development. But if you move the same piece twice in the opening, then that has kind of thrown away that opening advantage. So again, this is nothing terminal for my opponent, but it's the type of small mistake that if you're at the 1200 level and looking to improve, you want to try to get out of your game. Okay, so now my opponent has advanced d4. This is a pretty common idea. What's going to happen is I'm going to capture on d4 and he'll take back with the knight, and we get a structural imbalance in the pawn structure. Well, I expect he'll take back with the knight anyway. That's what usually happens. He could take back with the queen, of course, as well, but if he did that, then he'd lose a tempo, like just going back a move. If he took with the queen, then I'd be able to develop with tempo with knight to c6. So that's why he took with the knight, and I am just going to keep it simple and get castled. So the setup that my opponent has got here is completely fine, but he's just one move behind where he could have been if he'd played his bishop out to c4 in the first place, right? Just go back. If he'd played bishop to c4 in one move, then he could have had this position, he could have had this position with white to move. Okay, let's go back to the game. So he's played rook to e1, which is fine. Getting the rook into the action as well. Rooks in the center are usually better than rooks on the edge of the board, so rook to e1 is an improvement. And now I'm going to play queen to c7. What I want to do is I want to develop with tempo. So I'm getting the queen to a better square here with a threat. The threat is to take white's light squared bishop. So I think back here, for example, maybe the most natural move is something like knight to c6, but a slight improvement is to develop with a threat, right? So I'm gaining time. This is how you want to play if you can. You want to get your pieces off their starting squares with threats and therefore a gain of time. Okay, so my opponent's just gone back, so now the bishop is protected and safe enough where it is. So now I'm going to keep expanding with b5. Now, I could also consider bringing the knight out here. That might actually follow some good opening fundamentals, because if he takes, then I could perhaps capture with a pawn towards the center. But the idea of playing b5 is that I want to have the bishop on this long diagonal. Like on b7, it's going to do a good job of targeting the e4 pawn. Okay, so let's play b5. If you're enjoying this video so far, please do me a quick favor and drop a like down below. It'll help the video reach a greater audience. And with that, let's get back to the game. And with the bishop on b7, this knight on f6, and always the threat in the air of playing b4 to kick this knight, I'm going to have some kind of threats against this pawn on e4. This is partly about knowing the opening as well, just knowing where the pieces should go, which setup you want to go for. Okay, so let's just continue here. Bishop to b7. If my opponent captured this knight, I can just take back, so no problem there. What we've got actually in this position is an open center. Because we had white play d4 and I captured with the c-pawn, we've got an open center, and my opponent has made the type of mistake which I half expected as I was doing that introduction to the type of center that we've got. He's captured my knight with his bishop. Okay, so why is this wrong? The reason that this is wrong is because with an open center, bishops tend to be better than knights. In a closed center, the knights can outperform because there's all these little gaps and holes for the knights to jump into. But with an open center, the bishop has got a lot of influence now over this long diagonal. So I think part of becoming a strong chess player is recognizing the type of position that you've got and which types of trades that you want to make. So back here, after he played bishop to g5, I was thinking to myself, I bet that he's going to capture this knight with the bishop, because it's just the type of mistake that you see around this level. Okay, so now it goes back with knight to f3. I've still got ideas of targeting this pawn potentially, but I think what I want to do before creating any more threats is just to finish my development. Another move that I can consider here for sure is actually to capture this knight. That would actually win material, because bishop takes knight, pawn takes back, and then queen takes pawn. I would be a little bit behind in development in that case, and also I've just noticed that white in that position would have queen takes d6. So as I'm giving my thought process, sometimes I'll see a move which looks tempting, and sometimes I'll then see a bit further and then correct myself. So I don't think I want to go after that yet. I could also just consider taking the knight and then not taking the pawn straight away. That would provide damage to white's pawn structure. But I think I want to be able to recapture immediately. I want to get this knight off the starting square, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. The question is whether I want to play knight to c6 or knight to d7. From c6, it could go to a5 potentially, targeting the light squared bishop. I think this is what I'm going to do. And then one of my follow-up moves is going to be rook to d8, just to add defense to this pawn, making that idea of capturing the knight more possible. Just simple chess here. Want to get the pieces developed, get the rooks to good spots. So rook to c8 is one idea, rook to d8 is another. Generally, rooks belong on open files or on semi-open files. So I haven't won any material yet, but I think because of the material imbalance, the fact that I've got a dark squared bishop versus a knight for white, I've got a good advantage here already. Can't see the engine evaluation, of course, but I would imagine that black is quite a bit better here. So h3. I'm not really sure of the point of this move, but it might again be indicative of the type of mistake which is made at this level. Why play h3? If I try to get inside the mind of my opponent here, it could be that in some future time he wants to avoid a back rank mate possibility, but that's a long way off. If that was his idea, then I think it's a flawed idea. I think there's other priorities in this position. It is hard to think of a plan for white, though, I must admit. Like, what does white do in a position like this? Maybe you could connect the rooks with a move such as queen to d2, and then follow that up with rook to d1. That would at least add some pressure to the d6 pawn. I just don't think that h3 does very much here. Like if there was a threat of playing knight to g4 or something like that, if there was a threat of a black piece arriving on g4, then preventing that with h3 could make some sense, but in this position I don't think it actually helps. So I'm just going to continue with bringing my rooks to better squares. Rook to d8 and rook to c8 are incoming. It's worth noting that white can't really move this knight either without this pawn on b2 becoming weak. I could consider the move b4, pushing this knight somewhere, let's say over to a4. So b4, knight to a4, and then taking the pawn. But it might also be notable that I didn't go for that straight away. I want to develop my pieces before going to grab material. So now my opponent's played queen to c1, which intuitively looks a bit awkward. It's a strange square for the queen, but let's just think of what the idea could be. Maybe he's looking to come into f4. Maybe he's looking to support knight to g5, so that if I take, then he can take back with the queen. He could also be just defending that pawn on b2 against the threat that I was talking about before, right? Of b4, knight over to a4, and then capturing the pawn. So now the queen is defending the pawn on b2. I'm just going to keep on getting my rooks to better squares. So now I would say I've finished my development and it's time to start looking for a plan. One plan could be knight to a5, and that would mean that I'd eliminate the other white light squared bishop. But if I played knight to a5 and capture here, then he could recapture with the pawn, and that would actually open the a file for the benefit of white's rook. The white rook would be playing in that case. So I don't think I actually want to do that. I do think that this knight on c6 isn't doing much though, so I want to look for a way to either improve it or to trade it off. One way to trade it off is to go to e5. So knight to e5, knight takes, and then bishop takes. And then the bishop is actually on quite a good diagonal. Like imagine the bishop on e5. It's got some threats of coming into h2, particularly with the queen behind it. Perhaps a long way off, but this is the kind of maneuver that I'm looking at. I think we're going to go for this. I think I want this knight to be traded off because it's not doing much, and I would be happy with this trade. Also, this opens the light squared bishop. So now, after that trade, if we get it, we might not, of course, but after this trade, I've got the threat on the pawn on e4. Remember I said at the start of the game how putting the bishop on this long light squared diagonal could create some potential threats against e4. Well, we might be able to see that come to fruition. Let's see. Okay, so we get the trade that I was expecting, and now the pawn on e4 is under attack. So my opponent has to do something about that, and he doesn't. So this is another typical mistake in the 1200 level, just not noticing your opponent's threats. This pawn is undefended, and I can take it, I think. It's worth doing a double check, of course, because there could be some trick in the position. My instinct tells me that there isn't, but you have to follow calculation, not instincts. So before I take the pawn, I'm just going to look at what my opponent might be able to do to prove that I can't take the pawn, in fact. Okay, so the problem perhaps with taking the pawn is that there could be some discovered attack. So after I take the pawn on e4, the bishop will be hanging. So is there something such as knight to g3? Well, that would attack the bishop twice. So imagine I've got my light squared bishop on e4 after taking the pawn. I don't worry about knight to g3 though, because I could simply move the bishop back. Other things that my opponent could try, is there some kind of checkmating tactic? Not really. My opponent doesn't have pieces close enough, so I'm just going to go ahead and take this pawn. I did my double check, and I'm happy with the fact that I can just take the material that's on offer here. So he strikes with f4, so that attacks my bishop. And let's just move back. Let's just move back to a safe square. This bishop is now very powerful. It's actually targeting the pawn on g2. I could even look to put the queen behind the bishop. So let's say he played knight to d4. Well, then I could play queen to b7. I can't do that now, however, because he's attacking the bishop twice. This is the kind of thing that I saw coming before I took the pawn on e4. I can't reinforce it with the queen because that would mean that I'd have only one defender and he'd have two attackers. So instead, I'm just going to move the bishop back, and now I might be able to put the queen in front of the bishop with some idea of targeting the g2 pawn. If you've watched this far, it's because you're serious about improving your chess. I help ambitious adults reach their goals in the game at the below 2000 ELO level. So if you'd like to explore working together, click the link in the description below. It's at the top of the description or as the pinned comment, and we can see if working together will be a good fit. And with that, let's get back to the game. So my position's very good here, of course. I've got an unopposed dark squared bishop, I've got an extra pawn, and my opponent is trying to go aggressive, which makes a lot of sense, honestly. When you're down material, you want to look for moves which create threats and create complications. So f5, that's aggressive. So what he's doing here is he's trying to break up this pawn chain that I've got here on e6 and f7. So if I capture here, then he can take back with the knight. Now, the idea that I've just seen is that if he does that, then I can play queen to c5 check, and that would attack the knight and also check the white king. He does, however, have a move such as knight to d4 or knight to e3. So let's just follow that again. Pawn takes, f5, knight takes, queen to c5 check, and because the king and the knight are both attacked, the only way for him to avoid losing material is to block with the knight. So he'd have to go back to e3, for example. I quite like this. I think in that case I've got white pinned. So I'm imagining that this knight is going to end up on e3, and with my queen on c5, I'd be pinning the knight with the queen. And with my control over the dark squares, that might provide some possibilities. So I'm going to go for this. I expect he's going to take back with the knight, and then I'm going to play this check. And he's going to have to go here. And I think the key move here to take advantage of this is going to be something involving bishop to g5. Yeah, so this is exactly the line that I was expecting. Now, after bishop to g5, the knight is attacked again, and it is pinned. And I'm going to be able to continue to pile up the pressure with, for example, rook to e8. Rook to e8 first is also quite interesting. So due to this pin, it's going to be quite hard for white to move anything because, okay, so bishop to g5, he can't move the knight because it's pinned, and then he also can't move the queen or the rook because those two pieces are responsible for defending the knight. I need to make sure that there's nothing to worry about here with bishop takes f7, because that sequence that we just saw, f4, f5, and then I had to take with the e-pawn, means that this bishop is now stronger than it previously was. But to me this looks okay. To me this looks alright. This is pinned twice, both in front of the king and in front of the queen. And I'm going to be able to play rook to e8 and keep creating threats. This is already very difficult for white to play. So what I've just done here is I was looking at sequences that I could see that I thought would create problems for my opponent, and adding pressure to a pinned piece. Bishop to h4 is quite tempting, but then he can just block with g3, so I'm not sure if that really accomplishes anything. Bringing his king out like this can't be good though, so I think I'm just going to hold off on this threat for now. I'm just going to keep on adding pressure. I mean, he's still pinned, that's one thing to note here. He's still pinned twice. Remember before at the start, all the way back when he captured on f6, let's just go back to that. Yeah, this position here, when he captured this knight, I said that he could become weak on the dark squares and that the bishop was going to be stronger than the knight on an open board. Well, we're getting to see that, aren't we? We're getting to see that this bishop, this dark squared bishop, which is unopposed because white, unprovoked, traded off his own dark squared bishop, is very strong on these dark squares. Okay, so we've got white under an enormous amount of pressure, but in order to actually capitalize on that pressure, we need to keep improving. So how can we do that? How can we do that? One idea here is to play queen to e5, which makes the threat of bishop to h4 a lot stronger, because then he wouldn't be able to block with g3. Another move here actually is to play bishop takes g2. So bishop takes g2. If he takes back with the king, then we can actually look to take the knight, because distracting the king over to g2 will mean that the knight will be short of a defender. So that's a tactical way forward. That only wins a pawn, and I think in a position like this I actually want more than that. Let's see, so queen to e5, I'd have to be a little bit careful because that's putting the queen on the same file as white's rook. Let's see, queen to e5, I have to look at the checks, so what if bishop takes f7 check, then king takes, and does he have a good check with the knight in that case? Doesn't look like he does. I'm going to go for this. Remember as well that this knight is still pinned in front of the queen, so even though the knight can move away legally, given that we don't have the pin along that diagonal anymore, it still can't really do that practically because of the loss of the queen. So I've got a lot of threats coming now. I've got queen to f4 check as one idea. I've got bishop to h4 check, and I've taken away white's ability to play g3 because now that square would be controlled twice. This is very hard for white to play. White has got a lot of extra time on the clock, mostly because I've been spending quite a bit of my own time explaining my thought process here. And if I were my opponent right now, I would be spending the time that he's got, because he's in a very dire position, and if he's not careful, the game's going to be over very soon. We could also say that perhaps my opponent was playing too quickly. I mean, that's another criticism that you could level for sure, because if he had used his time earlier, then maybe he wouldn't have made some of the moves which had got him into so much trouble. But okay. So we've got queen to d4. My opponent is going for a queen trade, and that's very understandable. That's actually a very good idea. But the problem is that I've got this... I don't actually have this move, do I? No, I don't. I thought I had bishop to h4, but of course that's now controlled by the queen. So what should I do instead? Well, I definitely don't want the queen trade. With my opponent in so much king safety trouble, I want to keep the queens on the board. One idea is to infiltrate into h2. That looks quite good actually, because that would introduce a threat of potentially capturing on g2, so eliminate the knight and then take on g2. This looks quite good actually. I'm going to go for this. If you're finding this video to be valuable, go ahead and click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the future videos that I've got coming up. So the knight still can't move because of the pressure I've got against g2. And my threat is going to be to capture this knight with check, quite important. So my opponent doesn't have time for a move like rook to h1, which I was also considering. If rook to h1, then bishop takes followed by capturing on g2. So actually, I think this move queen to d4 was a good practical attempt by my opponent. It's correct that he wants to trade queens because his king is in so much trouble that a queen trade would relieve the pressure. But the way that I'm thinking here is because I've got an attack, because my opponent's king is in so much danger, I want to avoid that queen trade. So let's see if my opponent can find a way to hold on here. Rook to g1 possibly. That's one idea, although that loses control of the e3 square and would actually pick up not only the knight but also the white queen. Bishop to d5 is met by bishop takes d5, and then if queen takes back, then again I can just take the knight. Tough situation for my opponent here. Queen to g4 is another possible way of trying to defend, but again, my opponent has got too many things that he needs to defend in this position. He's got to defend the knight, and he's defending the knight at the moment with the king and the queen. So if queen to g4, then bishop takes on e3, rook takes back again, and I guess the king is on e3 in that line. Doesn't look good. The king shouldn't be on e3 with that much material still remaining on the board. Queen to g4 might be the best way though. Just trying to think what else he might try. Okay, that's an interesting move actually. So he moves the knight away and takes back with the bishop. Good move actually, I think. Yeah, got to give my opponent credit. I think that's not a bad move, not a bad attempt. So what can I do here? Taking the knight is obviously possible, and maybe is what I need to do. He'll take back with the bishop for sure. And in that case, do I have some check on h4? No, because the queen's still guarding it. Okay, I think that knight is actually too strong, and I need to take it off. Taking back with the bishop looks like the right way forward to me. So my opponent found a defense there. He takes there first, which I think is probably wrong, because now he's going to have to take back with the queen, and I'm going to have this bishop to h4 idea. If he takes back with the bishop, yeah, if he had taken back with the bishop, then bishop to e3 would have been correct and would have won the queen. Okay, so now he's got a threat against f7. This is his idea. Instinctively, it looks like there must be a checkmate here because I'm controlling the e-file. I've got the queen around white's king, and I've got this bishop also able to give a check. So how can we finish the game off here? The thing is, by taking with the queen on d5, he's lost control of the h4 square. So the first thing that I'm looking at is bishop to h4. So let's see, bishop to h4, he can't go to g1, he can't go to g3, he can't go to any square on the e-file because my rook is controlling that. So I think the only possible move is king to f3. So now we can just keep calculating. So the king's on f3, the bishop's on h4. I can give another check now, and that to me actually looks like checkmate. So let's just double check one more time. Bishop to h4, he can't play g3 because that's pinned. The only legal move, I believe, there's two legal moves actually. He could also go to f1, but in that case I can just play queen to h1, which, well, it could pick up the rook if nothing else, but I think there's also a checkmate here. I'm down to 45 seconds, so I'm just going to go with my instincts. I think probably most likely is king to f1, because king to f3 is checkmate, I'm pretty sure. Yep. King to f1, queen to h1, I think again is actually checkmate. Because because my opponent traded rooks on e8, right? He played this rook trade, which gave me uncontested control over the e file, which actually makes his king a lot more exposed. Let's see what my opponent does here. I think both moves lead to checkmate, so let's just run through it one more time. He has only 2 legal moves. One of them is king to f1. Now if king to f1, queen to h1. If he goes to f3, then queen to g3 also ends the game. So my opponent's got some time to think here, but I don't think it matters. I think he's going to find that his king is just getting mated in both of those lines. And there we go. That's checkmate. That's the end of the game. So let's do a quick recap of the key moments in this game and the mistakes that I noticed that my opponent made. The first few moves were fine. My opponent developed sensibly. I didn't like this move bishop to d3 because it would have been much better to move the bishop out to c4 in one move. And we saw a couple of moves later that he did play the bishop out to c4, but it took him 2 moves rather than 1, representing a loss of time. The next few moves again were quite good by my opponent, all very sensible, but this trade of the dark squared bishop for the knight was bad because white eventually became very weak on the dark squares. h3 also didn't make a lot of sense, and as we saw the game continue, eventually we got to a situation where my opponent simply left a pawn hanging. I think my opponent played too quickly here. He's got a good time advantage, and he played that move c3 without thinking for very long at all. So I was able to win a pawn, and as the game progressed, we saw that tactically he got checked on the dark squares and then pinned on the dark squares as well. This situation was very hard for my opponent to escape, and he felt compelled to bring his king out towards the defense of his knight. A few moves later, I was able to infiltrate with queen to h2, and after the following series of moves, we had a forced checkmate, again taking advantage of those dark squares. That would have been much harder to do if white had not made that trade earlier of bishop takes f6. So I think this game was a story of making the incorrect trade at the start, giving me an unopposed dark squared bishop, and then as well eventually allowing me to simply win a pawn, and after that the threats became too much for my opponent to handle. Just a reminder that I help ambitious adults reach their goals in chess at the below 2000 ELO level, so if you'd like to explore working together, click the link in the description below. It's at the top of the description or as the pinned comment. And aside from that, if you've enjoyed this video, do me a favour, drop a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this one, and do feel free to drop a comment down below as well with what you thought of this video. Until next time then, I'm Nathan Rose, thanks for watching, and bye for now.